And welcome back to the fourth episode of The Brass and the Truth. Today, we'll be covering a story of Colonel Owen Ray, a Special Forces Colonel, JBLM, Chief of Staff to First Corps. And his story covers a little bit of what's wrong with the military and how sentencing is carried out. The highlights of the story being his actions, his service record, and his discharge statement. Why did it happen the way it did, and what that means for other service members. Redleg, walk us through this one, man.
Yeah, so anyone who was in the military at the time of this case happened, this goes all the way back to 2021, 2022, probably remembers this. Most likely does. Just about everybody was talking about this case. If anyone doesn't remember this case or didn't know anything about this case, this happened, as Agro said, JBLM. This is just south of Seattle, Washington. He was being charged with assault and kidnapping. He had an argument with his wife and grabbed a weapon, kicked his wife. Police arrived on the site and had a standoff with the police for a couple hours till he was arrested. People were really questioning, obviously, his mental stability at that point and everything. As the case went on, it was his defense team mentioned his PTSD. And when that was mentioned, is when people within the military start talking about that maybe the PTSD did have a role to play in his actions. Now, the military made quick actions in separating him from the military before Pierce County Supreme Court made any decisions. And Pierce County is where the base is located. They lived off post. That's why Pierce County was involved. So what the Army gave him that was honorable discharge with retirement, and he was able to retain his rank of colonel. That is a full bird. What the Deputy Assistant Secretary Michael T. Mahoney said, the Army Grade Determination Review Board has reviewed the retirement in lieu of elimination based on misconduct and morale or professional dereliction. I approved his retirement in lieu of elimination. He will be placed on retirement list in his current grade of 06 Colonel. So when that was determined by the Army, there was a lot of disagreements within those down low, like your sergeants, your privates, your lieutenants, and so on. In the Army, as anyone knows, is all about setting an example and so on. Basically, was if a criminal can do this, then what stops a private from doing this, and will they receive the same exact punishment or basically reward, I guess you could say in this case. But yeah, I'll let you kind of go a little bit more details on what type of decisions by Pierce County.
Yeah, so when I was reading through this case, it seemed pretty clear that the civilian side of it was going to charge him with it, find him guilty, the whole nine, right? When we come down to how sentencing works between civilian and military, there's a duality of justice in the service that we kind of submit ourselves to. You don't have protection against double jeopardy in the case of the military because your service is almost like its own personage. And there's more we can talk about when we go to, I believe, our next episode on, some JAG and, military justice. But specifically, a soldier can be tried in a civilian court for damages because you're damaging the state, you're damaging a person, you're causing damage to the public in general. But then you also can be tried then in a court of military justice because you are doing damage to the service, damage to the reputation of the service, or taking yourself out of service in the ways that we do. So in this case, the proceedings from the military that would follow the civilian case are pretty cut and dry because the same evidence would be used, the same everything would get used, and it's its own issue for the service member, but the same outcome is not always the same because what is best for the service may be different than what's best for the civilian. And in this case, the service decided that it was better for Colonel Ray to retire in lieu of elimination to prevent possibly both excess paperwork, additional jail and charges, to possibly afford the service member's family the benefits without punishing them. Additionally, sometimes it's just easier to have someone quietly get kicked out than it is for them to go through the whole punishment process. This kind of leads to a level of unfairness when you have officers versus enlisted punishments, and the fact that officers can't be bumped down in rank. You either take a really light punishment or you get kicked out. Those are your two options. I honestly think that they would just do the quiet retire because of all the political backlash that all general appointmentships requires.
Yeah, which is something for another day for us to talk about, how politics has infiltrated senior ranking positions, which anyone in the officer corps can say once you get to a certain rank, you can start seeing it happening just based on the way they talk. But again, that's for another day. But from all the articles and even memory from back then, I don't think they even went to the court martial proceedings. I think they were trying to get him out as quickly as possible. My best guess is the Army didn't want to deal with it. They just want the civilian course to handle it, and it was pretty much a good idea what was going to happen, and that was prison, which Pierce County did give him. The maximum sentence was 10 years. They gave him 5 years. And that was in 2002 is when he was sentenced to 5 years. So if he wasn't up for parole, he'd be coming out of prison in a couple of years now. But to stick with stuff with the Army, he was being looked at by the Inspector General, or IG, after a complaint by an officer within First SFG. Now, that didn't go anywhere, and it's no shock that it didn't. We can always talk about IG another day. There's a lot of things that could be talked about the Inspector General. But the complaint stated that he regularly overreacted and had emotional outbursts and berated and shamed subordinates in public, leading to a toxic command climate. But the IG reported return as not substantial. So you could say that there were some signs there that there's something wasn't right about him. That he probably should not have gotten bumped up. Even though it was the same rank, he being in charge of Special Forces Group and to the position that he moved up to is still the same rank. It is considered still a promotion by position. Now, knowing that he has PTSD, he did testify that I think he was like, what was it, 8 deployments, I think it said in one of the articles. So it kind of makes sense for him to have PTSD. It could have had a factor in some of his behavior. There's no way to verify that without actually reading his report, but that's impossible because of HIPAA and so on, or without actually talking to him. But that's probably something he'll never admit, that he was a bad leader or whatever and create a toxic command climate. But this does go into something that we can always talk about another day, which is mental health in the military, which still is a major problem in the military. And I can speak on my own behalf because I seek mental health treatment the last couple of years of my time in the military. And I can, at that time of the episode, I can tell you what my provider said that was shocking. But this is not, it's shocking what she said about the Army. I should say that. I'll clarify, is regarding the Army's views on mental health. They try to ignore some of the things regarding mental health. And they put a lot of red tape. They do acknowledge PTSD in that, but to a certain extent with the treatment and everything. If anyone knows how people with PTSD are, you have to assess what is the best job for them in the military at a certain point. High amount of stress for some individuals with PTSD could be too much. And maybe with him having the command of 1st Special Forces Group was maybe too much for him. So maybe it would have been best time of the incident he was in a different position in a higher, more stressful job. Maybe with the acknowledgement of his mental condition, he have been placed in a more suitable position that could have prevented what had happened. Maybe not. They could have given him early retirement through medical retirement. So
Yeah, but how
this
much
is
of that is on the service member not wanting to leave?
now okay. So when it comes to med boards, they can, as we stated in the previous episode, it can be forced on you. Sometimes you don't have a choice in the matter. So they can force to give him medical retirement. It's basically you want to get medical retirement, no ifs or buts about it. So if that was a thing where the Army adopts that policy of we got to take better care of our service members with mental health conditions where certain positions or having this type of lifestyle is just too much for them, where if we keep on putting this type of pressure on them, they're going to snap and have an event that is, like in this case, there's no way turning back. It's just going to be life altering and ruin your life. It's just best to separate them medically. And really, with so as anyone who's gone through the med board or the VA claims and all that, you can get a high amount percentage through mental health. So there's a way you can get the medical retirement through, especially with the amount of years he's been in, being special forces and all that. He can culminate the needed percentage to be able to get the retirement. I'm willing to bet it at the time of the incident. So even then, if he couldn't, maybe just give him a less stressful job. Maybe move him to cadet command or something, or to an ROTC program. And yeah, you may have to bump him down to lieutenant colonel, but he can still retire as a full bird because that's the highest rank that he obtained. It's just looking out for the welfare of the soldier.
Yeah, looking out for the welfare of the soldier. I'm just all over the place on this one because I also have different topics I want to hit on. Mental health as far as not just PTSD but just general treatment of our soldiers and how that goes into it. For this guy, it's a question of similar to what Weekend Warrior was saying last time. We don't want to question. We don't want to make it sound like we're not supporting victims of X, Y, or Z or not believing.
Mm-hmm.
There are people out there that are going to look at this story for Colonel Ray and say, was he just crying PTSD at the end to cover himself? The insanity defense,
Yeah.
There was obviously alcohol involved in this. I don't think normal people just snap and point guns at their, wife and kids. So there's a lot to unpack in this. But we got to look at, how does that get used and abused? And then we got to look at, in this case, the topic we want to get after is, does he deserve to retire with benefits? Does his family deserve to get screwed over not having benefits because of his service record? Because I guarantee you there's people that served with him that did like him as a person, that did like him as a boss or a leader or a subordinate, because How many times have you known somebody who either deployed with you or served with you or whatever, and they got the nth degree from other people that didn't know that person? And again, he could be the scum of the earth. I'm not trying to defend someone who beats their wife, but I'm just
Mm-hmm.
saying those people would listen in and say, well, his service was honorable. He was great. He sacrificed for the country. What
Mm-hmm.
does he deserve from the military as far as classification of service?
Yeah. And again, they always say that your classification of discharge is should be reflected based on how your entire career went, not just based on one event. As everyone knows, it's not always true. Yeah, both of us can testify to that. And knowing that is a fact, why was he given an honorable? Well, maybe it was because of the family. Question is though, would they have done the same thing for a sergeant, a captain, or even a lieutenant who is married and has kids? I really doubt it. I wholeheartedly doubt that they would have done the same exact thing for them. They could easily say we gave it to him because of the family, but I just knowing how the army is, I just don't see that staff sergeant or captain getting an honorable simply because they feel bad for the family and they want them to have the benefits. They probably would have gotten other than honorable or even straight out dishonorable, even though everything before then was honorable. This one
Hmm.
event would have given them an OTH or dishonorable. Agro did find a great article. If anyone wants to read it, it's by military.com. And it's out here's why generals often get light sentences at court martials, according to advocates. Great opening sentence is the military's problem of different spanks for different ranks, or officers facing lighter punishment than enlisted troops for the same offense may be built into military justice systems sentencing process in addition to stemming from cultural issues, advocates say. So this is part of what we want to talk about, and we'll give some examples after this as well. We were able to find one on Facebook that Army UTF one was posted that gives some great examples. And then we found on Reddit someone who did some data, and for warning, this data does not have any sources to this. So in a later episode, we'll try to gather our own data, try to verify it, and we'll let you all know. But this is what the president of Protect Our Defenders said. For the E3 that committed the same offense that sent him in jail and got punitive discharge, is kind of hard to explain to that E3 why the general officer, who's supposed to be held to a higher standard, has committed the same offenses, is fined $160,000 in retirement the rest of his life. It does
And
exist.
yeah, this is one of the things that I want to talk about in our JAG episode is how discharge classifications should be based entirely upon the service of the member, or we need to rewrite the way it's written, because the way the officer eliminations work, right, is so different that it's a tool for the military to not go through the proceedings with officers versus enlisted. Now, as Red Leg has mentioned, these stories are different between the ranks. Even a captain to a colonel gets sentenced differently, and we can look at that Reddit post and try to go out and confirm through, eDocket to see how many cases for what rank actually end in punishment sentencing or, discharge. Just officer to enlisted is so different. I used a resignation in lieu of elimination myself for my own DUI, and full bore out there on the table. I'll tell you, I could have fought to stay in. I had people that wanted me to stay in. I had leadership through the whole process that were like, please just, you know, ride it out. And maybe if I had been an E7, I could have, because who said they don't get their stripes without it? But I tell you, I took that as the I'm going to stop fighting and make it easy on myself and the army. And I know that's what they do for the more advanced cases for the higher ranks. But I had to fight for that classification to be honorable because, the 5 years I did, I was the perfect good little soldier. And one night on my off time that I drank too much at someone's house and didn't want to stay at this single female lieutenant's place. The drunk me made a stupid decision. That shouldn't have changed my whole career's outlook. Now, was it dumb? Did I deserve to get punished for it? Absolutely. But should I be told that all of my service was not honorable? No. That higher standard still applying, I was okay with them starting the elimination process. For things like beating your wife and not dealing with your PTSD and berating your people, maybe a little bit of a different conversation because there's a pattern. There's problems that should have been addressed. Problems as leaders we should address. I should have addressed my alcoholism, but the military supported that.
Mhm. Yeah, and I am still dealing with my situation. And again, I can't speak on it. I will say it wasn't illegal. It's nothing that would send me to prison or whatever. But to see someone like him and others that have committed similar crimes that were senior prison in his case that actually did send him to prison where the army say, you know what, we'll give you an honorable discharge. It leaves a really bad taste in my mouth. And it
Right?
makes me
He's a
quit.
felon.
Yeah, he's a legit felon. Whereas if I had done it on the civilian side, like no one would care. Job wise, to be case by case basis. They may still keep me. They may move me to another job. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But it's just it's very irritating. It makes me honestly angry. Just know that this the stuff that they did to me just honestly pisses me off. That they're basically, again, I'll say it, they're rewarding these individuals and they're
Yeah.
punishing guys like me.
And that's what it is. So it again, I go back to the guy probably had, you know, 15 probably great years of service or more where he did things right. Or maybe he didn't ask up to the right. We won't know, but the chances are higher that he did the right things most of the time. And so, should he be rewarded for that more in some way? Yes. I think his family should still reap the benefit of his good years, but he went to prison for 5 years. He would be Lautenberg Act. Like, he could not own or hold a firearm. And I think the way to make it make sense, if we were going to reform the system, if we could make the
Mm-hmm.
change, and tell me what you think about this, an honorable discharge should be given to someone who the Army would not just want to take back if they could, but would be able to come back into service. Now, that's
Mm-hmm.
exclude medical, right? But like if you didn't do anything so illegal that the Army couldn't take you back, couldn't use
Yeah.
you, and the Army would want to take you back. For example, soldier had a consensual relationship with a lower ranking individual not in their unit.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, within a scope that there's not, pressure, authority, whatever, or influence.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly don't think that would be, because we go back to the fraternization episode where, Weekend Warrior was talking about downrange. People get horny. People feel things. People are going to do things. It's
Yeah.
more
And
dangerous there.
talk to anybody who's deployed, they say it happens all the time and it
But
gets brushed underneath the rug. And we'll talk about a couple of cases, anyways, at the
yeah.
end of the
And so
episode.
all of that makes, I get it. You're trying to avoid that where it would cause problems downrange. But if you're on a base in Afghanistan and you sleep with an Air Force captain, you're an infantry captain, you sleep with an Air Force captain, and there's no crossover, or Air Force SWO, your weather guy or
Mm-hmm.
gal, like that shouldn't matter. And I get it. People are like, well, where do the lines blur? It's gray. It's already gray. It's all already.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, if I say they were a good leader, they did their job, they were doing the service and I would take them back tomorrow, then that should be in that honorable category.
Well, it
It's the one
also
where the guy went to jail for 5 years and can't hold a gun anymore. That probably takes him out.
they also should take statements from their peers and subordinates on this. Like, talk to the soldiers that worked for them or work alongside them, their fellow lieutenants or captains, whatever, and ask them, will you work with this individual ever again? How was it working along with them or for them?
Mm-hmm.
And they say it was great, then that should have an impact on keeping them or not, or letting them to come back, and so on. I mean, what does a general honestly know about a lieutenant or a captain? They never saw their face or even knew who their name was until that name popped up on their desk saying, "Oh, they're up for an Article 15." Oh, I mean, let me just pull up their piece of paper with their OER and see what this says. Oh, yeah, I'm obviously know exactly what this person is like. You don't know what a person is like reading a 2-page paper. You really don't. The best way to know somebody is by talking to their coworkers. And
Okay.
I mean,
Well, talking to coworkers and then statements, right? Like I know for mine, I got sworn statements, letters of recommendation, etc., from multiple people. Ironically, I actually asked for a letter from the colonel who also got a DUI within about a month of mine, the one who didn't get punished at all, which is a whole yeah, sorry. I shouldn't say he didn't get punished at all, right? Obviously, he went through the legal stuff with the Korean government, but he got a letter of
he was allowed to
reprimand,
say in the army.
and that's it. He didn't get a Gomar. He did not get any proceedings to kick him out. They did not pursue elimination or retirement for him. He was able to continue on in his position, and I won't divulge which G staff position he was on because I don't want people to go back and figure it out or whatever.
And
You know,
dox him.
he was a good dude. It like me had too much the night before. C'est la vie, but like when he talked to me later because I was the liaison for the unit, he kind of told me it was like kind of rough that I was getting handled the way I was when he wasn't, and so he ended up signing a letter for me that helped out. But those letters are very important. It's just again,
Mhm.
like you're saying, it's that is this person someone that the service should keep or use or recommend as a honorable person?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say one more on this because we're getting into some stuff that is for another topic. Is that I could have fought mine a little bit more. Um, Part of it was just because of how much they were putting me through. I just had enough of it. I just wanted to get out. I was wanted. It was to me. It was better to just fight it in the outside than within because I was going to be able to. It was going to be easier for me to fight it in the outside than within because again, this is part of the Jack stuff that we could talk about because it's very different to go through the legal system in the army than it is on the civilian side. And again, the two of us will explain how it works in the military and how it's different on the civilian side. Because one of us does have a degree that understands it a lot better, and I have a minor that is on the political science side.
Yeah.
So we have a little bit of an idea how it works on the civilian side. We can always find someone that is a lawyer or whatever, but to come on and explain it. But it is very different on the military side. You think you can defend yourself? Yes or no? Really depends. But anyways,
Oh, check it real quick.
mhm.
Slight aside. The ATF on their website, I did not know if you get a dishonorable discharge out of the military, you can't own a firearm.
You can or can't.
Cannot. So under 18 USC 922G, uh, if you've been
Because
discharged
you're
from the armed forces,
considered a threat. Yeah.
right? And so that that being wild, felons can't own firearms. He's a felon who can't own a firearm, but he got an honorable discharge.
Yeah,
And it's
so it
one of
kind of
those, like,
contradicts itself. So
right?
so can he own one or can he not? But yeah, it's definitely someone that you got to talk to someone from ATF or a lawyer to figure out like,
Oh
can
no, he
he own
can't.
one or
But
not?
that's just funny that,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
one side said,
Um,
yeah, sure.
yeah, it's just but yeah, there's we are getting a little off topic. It's just because legal stuff in the military is just very different than what you think. They tell you can fight it to a way you can't. If you are guilty, it's very hard to fight it. They will tell you up to it. It will help you. It really depends on the general. It really comes down to him, and it's very tricky. It's very tricky because unless you're going through the court martial proceedings, you're fighting a general, not a lawyer, and that's where it gets tricky.
I wrote circles around my legal guys. Like, yeah, you're right. Different episode, but just for Colonel Ray, it was that level of like what constitutes, what doesn't. At the end of the day, honorable, probably not. Dishonorable, I'm torn between a general because with a general, he still gets some benefits. I think his family shouldn't be screwed over, and I think he shouldn't have, a totally honorable case because it's clear that there were other issues that weren't being that should take by giving a classification difference into account what we need to start doing. We need to start paying attention to the mental health problems and then
Mm-hmm.
addressing them and not allowing them to go to the point of this incident.
Well, again, this is where when we talk about IG, we need IG needs to do a better job. And anyone who's been in the military knows that IG is not the greatest. Because obviously
Their
there
hall
was something
monitors.
there. There's obviously was something there, and they just completely ignored it. It again will explain the issues with them, and both of us have personal experience with them, and we presented the regulations to them, and they're like, "Yeah, no," even though the regulations basically said they're in the wrong, and they're like, "No, you're wrong." But okay,
Well, my
uh,
favorite is we talk up the big game, right? And we
mm-hmm.
talk about how IG is supposed to be the eyes and the ears of the commander, and uh, I'd love to do like we keep saying we'll do whole episodes. We
Yeah.
really we're just building our list right now, which is great. But
Yeah.
IG and Sharp once asked me, "Are you sure this is what your recommendation should be?" And I'm like, "It fits the reg to a T." It's like you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to avoid punishing this person because you don't want the problems that come with it. And I'm like, I'm telling
Yeah.
you, after doing the investigative legwork, this is what it is. Why are you questioning my recommendation?
Well,
Leave
they're
it to
also
the
afraid.
commander to say yay or nay.
They're afraid to piss off their boss, especially IG, because they work for the commander of the base. They're afraid to upset the individual. That's the main problem. When they're working for that person, not only fear them, they have to protect them. If you're going to challenge the commander of the base, what do you expect? They're going to try to protect them. But again, that's something to my personal experience. I can explain when we go to that episode.
Yeah. And so
But
I just, this has been, a roundabout of the same. And it's just, we hope that people will challenge these entities and challenge the cause because the whole purpose of this podcast is, at least as I understand it, talking about those hard to talk about subjects such as this, bringing to light that change is needed, and then
mm-hmm.
how do we get there? Introducing some of
Yeah.
those ideas and hoping that, some of our listeners will comment with their ideas, their experiences, and put it out there because thankfully we have these news articles out here that are eye-opening to some of these things, but we're putting a voice to it for the little guys too, though, and that's what it needs to be until real
And
change happens.
we currently have a sick dev who's saying he wants to make changes. So quite early, there's still time for him to make those changes. Part of what we need to do is get this podcast growing, and part of doing that is having listeners help grow this podcast, but that's what needs to be done. Is he's not going to know all the issues, and those below him are not going to know all the issues unless people tell them, and they're not in seeing it on social media. So you need to also go on social media and make it known. And that's also one of the issues with the military. People are afraid to say things, so those in the outside need to say it for them. So, but anyways,
So,
before it gets too late, we do need to talk about the other stuff. Yeah.
yeah, so in moving forward, talking about the data and Sky Soldier of Justice, the article you had sent out to our group chat earlier, I was just looking at it briefly, and this is one of the funny things. So, for our listeners, refusal to jump out of an airplane as an airborne soldier is a no go. But one of the recent stories is about soldiers who refused to jump twice, getting a general discharge versus honorable or other. Red leg, walk me through what you think, what our active duty missile chaser thinks.
Yeah, so there's very little context for these disciplinary actions from Sky Social Justice. This is posted by Army WTF Moments. Um, so it was a PF2. He was separated by a general discharge for refusing to jump, as said by Agro. It was two separate airborne operations. Obviously, there's no combat deployments, so it had been a training incident, two training operations. So one of our friends who went to airborne school said that it was a justifiable discharge because he puts people's lives at risk that are in the airplane. Our other friend who is in the airborne unit said that it was warranted and that he knew that it was a possibility because of he was told that he will go through the UCMJ process if he refuses to jump. It's apparently something they say every single time before a jump. Very understandable that they would tell you what will happen if you refuse to jump and all that. I'm all for punishments for refusing to jump if you're in an airborne unit. What do you expect? It is quite odd that he refused to jump when he is with the 173rd Airborne Regiment. When he went through airborne school, my only guess is he still was scared. Maybe he saw something like a bad jump or whatever while he was with the 173rd. But anyways, I just don't see what was it really worth getting him a general discharge. Why not just reassign him to another unit? Why not just give him an Argo 15, be done with it, separate him with an honorable discharge? I just don't see why give him a general discharge for not jumping out of the airplane, especially when it is a training jump, not a combat jump. And again, we just talked about a guy who got an honorable discharge for beating his wife and had a 2-hour standoff with the police. And again, there's others. We will talk about them here in this towards the end of this episode and other episodes. It just doesn't make sense to me. And they were arguing it makes sense. And to me, at this point, when going through my personal incidents and just reviewing other cases and that and their discharges, I at this point I just question every discharge stuff like this. Like it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I'm of the mind that it would need to be more than 2 jumps for me to consider a general discharge, because general meaning that it was in service, that they did whatever they did, and that there was misconduct throughout 2 times. It leaves too much ambiguity to it. Unless you put them up in the same day or day to day, you refuse to jump 30 minutes later, I'm going to send you back up. Like, whatever the issue was, whatever context we're missing, I
Mm-hmm.
just want to know how you can justify with a blanket 2 refusals. Should you
Mm-hmm.
refuse to jump? No, it's dumb. Should you, if you've got mental reservation, aren't physically able, whatever, okay, sure, but I can see that happening more than once if you jump enough times or go up enough times. And so to Missile Chaser's point, I'm going to keep calling him that until until he
When you
comes
talk
on.
about a show, we'll call it that.
Um,
I've been thinking about what his nickname should be. That's a good one.
um, I mean, he'll probably want it to be like Roadrunner or something. There's
No,
all
it's
kinds of
gonna be
different.
Missile Chaser. He's a
Yeah,
nerd.
to Missile Chaser, it's like I I get it. He doesn't jump, or people in the unit don't jump more than once every 4 months. Fine, but if we're just using these blanket ultimatums, you could be kicking out people that truly want to stand. And my suggestion was, hey, if they refuse to jump, strip them of their wings because there's a good chance they still want to serve, and you can go use them to do
Mm-hmm.
anything else. Like,
Especially at
would it suck?
PV2.
Sure, but that's a contract we lose for one aspect of their entire service.
Mm-hmm. And again, you have to review the qualifications of the GI Bill, but you have to have an honorable to get the GI Bill. Now, the GI Bill, the amount of money you get is determined based on your time of service and that. So, if I understood it right, even with a PF2, you get it. It's not a whole lot, but again, you have to double check it, see if he actually does have it. I'm pretty sure after just even 2 years, you have it. But still, even then, is it really worth having him walk around the rest of his life having a general discharge? And if that is standard to give a general discharge for refusing to jump after 2 refusals, there's no way for him to get the upgrade. So it's just something he's going to be carrying around the rest of his life. So is it really worth harming him and anyone else that had a refusal to jump to have a general? It's just, to me, it's just not. I don't, unless it's combat for me. I just think it's more worth having them be reassigned to another unit. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
more worth people's tax dollars.
Well, especially while we were dealing with the recruiting crisis. Man, if I told my boss, hey, I'm kicking somebody out because they didn't do this thing that involves considerable risk to, their body if
Mm-hmm.
done improperly, he would have been like, well, why didn't they do it? And we'd go down the rabbit hole. He wouldn't be like, oh, yep, that makes sense. Kick him out by
Yeah.
like it. There's no
Airborne
way.
is considered a hazard job. You get extra pay for it. So,
Right. Yeah. Jump pay is a thing.
yeah. Yeah. So it's just, but we'll move on. There's a couple more to point out. So we talked about fraternization the last episode. So there was a staff sergeant that was found guilty of sexual harassment and attempted fraternizing. Then you had a warrant officer who got reprimanded for unwanted physical contact. And is going through the officer elimination proceeding. A captain received a GOMAR for engaging in unprofessional prohibited relationship, which is fraternization. He was also with a staff sergeant. Almost missed that part. So they also gave him contact on becoming of an officer. Along with that, he's also getting officer elimination proceeding. Now, it doesn't say what type of recommendation of discharge that these two individuals are receiving. Now, with their ranks, they're going to have to go through the board of elimination. So the board is going to make that determination. It's going to take a while to even know what that is. But even just looking at that, that is a harsher punishment than even what that Colonel Ray got. And he actually committed a felon, and those two didn't. In the civilian world, that's not a crime for fraternization. I mean,
Right.
yeah, no one, unwanted physical contact, yeah, like that is weird stuff. Like, no one wants that and all that stuff. Like, it's going
Yeah.
to cause
Well.
problems for anybody. But as for the captain, who knows, there's a lot more context involved, but you're not going to go in prison for that. You're just not.
Yeah. It goes back to it's a matter of convenience for the higher rank. A captain and a warrant officer are not gonna trouble the military as much for their eliminations earlier on. It's not going to lead to as much of a legal battle. Now they could still fight it, and they might, but it's wild to see the rank difference.
It's going to be hard, though, because depending on the evidence, even if they were to fight it, because if the evidence shows that it happened, no matter how hard they fight it, the argument is going to be, well, the evidence shows that you committed it. That's in Article 134. You're gone. Doesn't matter how hard they fight against it. Doesn't matter how many sworn statements they get from people showing their support on Article 134, and they're being separated. It's just that is part of the legal proceedings, and that, again, it goes to what we said earlier that we'll talk about another time. But again, we'll reiterate: taxpayer dollars, court martials cost money, commissioning people costs money. So your taxpayer dollars went to commission this captain and that chief warrant officer. So separating these two individuals is going to cost you money, and it's going to cost money to replace these two individuals. Even if the warrant officer is a little creepy, still,
Well,
it's going to cost a lot of money. These two individuals aren't cheap. It's not like a private where it's cheap to manufacture them. Officers are not, especially warrant officers. These guys are expensive.
cost of training, it's inflated to a ridiculous amount. The average cost to
Yes.
train a private was listed as like $125,000, and I was just like,
That's because
yes,
they stretched out the training time. Even when it came to infantry, they added like a week or two to it. So that's part of the reason why it is more expensive.
yeah. So we'll look into that. We'll look into some more data sets. That's all I have for today. Red Leg, you got anything else you want to discuss
Yeah,
today?
just adding really quick. Again, like I said last week, the Army doesn't want to admit how rampant fraternization actually is. There again, there's two more cases right there. Another thing that we'll talk about is sexual assault, or what the Army calls sharp. Everyone knows how common it is. The Army tries to fight it as hard as they can. Will promise you that they try to fight as hard as they can, but it is kind of similar to a case where it's a lot more common than what people think it is. Just looking at the 173rd, you had a PFC who got discharged for abusive sexual assault contact, a PFC discharged for sexually harassing, and a staff sergeant found guilty of sexually harassing and attempting fraternizing with a
Yeah.
specialist, as I said earlier. So it, they're common. So
Well, and it is right. We sat and we did sharp classes almost quarterly because it seemed like there was always another mandate. Oh, there's a training out. There's a training out. There's a training out. And I know
yeah,
twice a year we had to do it. Not,
I
and I
think
don't
one
want
point
the
is
viewers
four
to think
times a year.
yeah, quarterly, right?
Yeah.
I'm not against training against sexual harassment or assault. That's
Mm-hmm.
not what I'm trying to get at here. But I'll be honest, I don't think the same training over and over again helped. And I don't think the training
No.
was geared towards the right levels because it was, for some people, it was the first time they heard it. For some people, they'd heard the same thing 100 times.
Yeah.
One story that sticks with me is I went to a sharp training we had in an auditorium. It was a battalion wide training over a couple of days, reserved the theater. And when they did the thing, it was great. It was interactive. People were, asking good questions. And then I had one kid ask, well, why can't I go talk to this girl at the club? And what if she's, wearing short skirt? He was asking all the wrong questions that you're like, wait, why would anybody think that's an invite? And he was the example of the person that you see people complain about on the internet. I didn't think they existed.
Yeah.
I did not think there were actually people that were like, well, she was wearing a short skirt, so I thought it was okay. But it highlighted to me, like, even after this was at the end of the session, we had already talked through all of the things. We had already discussed consent. We had already talked about what was okay and what wasn't okay, and interaction outside of uniform and being included. And the guy still had the question, and it's just like,
Yeah.
for some people, I think it's needed. It's needed
Yeah.
more, but it is common. The time we spend together, the amount of time that we spent in the military together, there's
Mm-hmm.
no way that there wouldn't be rampant fraternization, rampant sexual interaction, not necessarily harassment, but that comes with the territory.
Yeah, and we'll talk about it when we get to sharp uh, in the future, but it becomes far more common during deployments, even if it's going to Europe. Because I remember hearing about my sister brigade when they were in Romania, how many cases of sharp infraternization they had. It was crazy amount. Um, and they were trying to prepare my brigade for it, and they were trying to see what they could do to reduce that number. Now I processed it out within just a couple of weeks, a couple of months while they were there. So I didn't get to hear how many cases there were by that point. But anyways, as for like the training, the best training for sharp I had was when I was at basic and at Bullock. When I got to my unit, they were awful. It was the same thing over and over again. No matter who it was just awful. And it definitely was one of those things. It got so repetitive that you start to ignore it. It's, it doesn't matter. No matter how much you want to say like this is awful stuff, we need to take it serious and all this other stuff. When you have heard it for the dozenth time, it starts to get annoying,
Yeah,
and
it's
that's
background
where
noise.
yes, and that's part of the issue because you hear it's too repetitive, and that's part of the problem because it happens quarterly, or for a time it was quarterly.
Well, it's not like you stopped listening and went out and raped people, but it was like
Yeah.
you stopped hearing it, and you maybe were less sensitive to what other people were thinking, or people didn't ask the questions for that one guy who didn't get it, and
Hmm.
so it just became the drone.
Yeah, and part of it too is anyone who's served on peacetime deployment or knew people who did, you miss the signs because of it. There is a thing whenever if you're involved in education or knew somebody who is like in my case, my father is there. You do need to have repetitiveness. It's good, but there is a thing about having too much of it. You cannot do too much of it, and that's what happens with sharp, for instance. And EO, there's too much of it. You do need to dial back on it.
Well, and we'll dive more into it in another episode, and I think we've said that maybe 8 times this time around. So, but
Because there's a
uh,
lot with this one.
oh yeah, well, I appreciate this again. Red Leg, I have dinner plans. Today's my dad's birthday. Gonna go hang out with him. Do you have any other topics you want to cover real quick?
No, that pretty much it. We
All
definitely need to save
right,
it for another time.
all good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was our fourth episode of The Brass and the Truth. Leave comments if you got questions, concerns, if something we said didn't make sense, or if you've got an opinion or know, stories that would add to the conversation. We encourage it all.